Chapter 19. Triple Sleuthing. "After them!" Bert shouted, and Danny quickly guided the skiff toward the fleeing boat. The Whisper was a more powerful craft, however, and stayed well ahead of them. They followed it through the green waterway, and it became smaller and smaller in the distance. By the time they reached the ocean, the Whisper was only a tiny dot. Nancy heaved a sigh. She felt completely defeated. "I was so sure we would close in on those men," she said. "Now they've slipped through our fingers." Ned patted her shoulder lightly. "Don't give up," he said kindly. "We're bound to get a break." George said, "I think the break is coming right now." She looked into the sky. A helicopter was making its way toward their skiff. "It's a police helicopter," Bert pointed out. The craft lowered until the young people in the skiff could see the officers aboard. They were shouting through a megaphone, but those on the water could not understand a word. "Too bad we don't have a ship-to-shore or ship-to-ship telephone," Danny said. The only way Nancy could get a message across to the men above was to point in the direction the Whisper had taken. She made motions with her hands to indicate that it was going very fast. Then she put her fingers to her lips, hoping the men might translate it to mean, "Whisper!" She could see the pilot bobbing his head and assumed he understood what she meant, that they should follow the suspect boat to the ocean. The copter turned and set off in that direction. Dave spoke up. "Too bad we can't be on hand to witness the capture. I'll bet the men in the Whisper put up a real fight." Bess said, "Well, I for one would just as soon not witness a battle. Let's go back." The skiff returned to Crocodile Island. The police launch was gone, but 2 officers stood on the dock and invited the young people to come ashore. They introduced themselves as Patman and Pfeiffer. "Aren't you Danny Cosgrove and these girls detectives?" "Yes." Nancy smiled and said Ned, Bert, and Dave were friends. "We've made some arrests," Patman reported. "For one, we caught the man named Yunky." "Oh, the one who hit Mr. Gonzalez with a golf ball?" Bess cried out. "Yes." Patman said they had found him hiding among some bushes. He had readily confessed to hitting the deadly shot toward Gonzalez. But Yunky also said that he had not done it of his own accord. Gimler and Sacco had hired him to do not only this, but several other illegal jobs. Yunky was well paid for his dastardly work. "Where is he now?" Ned asked. Patman told him that the police launch had taken away Yunky and all the other workers, who admitted helping Gimler and Sacco in some illegal secret work, but would not say what it was. 2 of the men had escaped, however. "It's important that we catch them. They're the ones who made phone calls and acted as spies whenever necessary." "As far as we know, they are still on the island. They are Gimler and Sacco's special henchmen named Stryker and Jackson. Unfortunately for them, they were not quick enough to follow Gimler on the Whisper, which set off in a hurry when you people showed up at the quay." Nancy asked if Gimler had gone off with Matt Carman and Breck Tobin. Patman nodded. "Yunky told us that. We sent word for a police helicopter to go out and intercept the craft." The listening group also learned that the fake Mr. and Mrs. Cosgrove and their daughter, who had posed as Miss Boonton, had been arrested. They were part of the Gimler-Sacco gang. The weapon Efi dug up belonged to Sacco, who buried it so the police would not find it if they visited Crocodile Island. He left the dog on the deserted quay because Efi had almost bitten one of the men on the Whisper, whose cruelty he hated. Nancy looked at the police officers and asked, "Did I understand you to say that you think 2 of the workmen are still on the island?" "Yes. A couple of Sacco's special buddies, and bad, both of them. They have records." "Where did they go?" Nancy asked. "We don't know," Patman replied. He walked off to join his fellow officer in another hunt. Nancy said to her friends, Why don't we start a search?" "Great idea," Ned agreed. The others were eager to begin, but Bess was cautious. "Maybe the men are armed. If so, we're walking into danger." Ned hurried off to ask the officers about the firearms. Patman replied, "According to Yankee, they were not armed. Didn't have time to go for any. I doubt that you'd be in any danger if you want to look around. Pfeiffer and I must stay within sight of the beach until the launch returns. It took all the captives to jail." Nancy had followed Ned and was alarmed at its import. She asked quickly, "Was one of the prisoners a man named Saul?" Patman pulled a pad from his pocket and consulted it. "I have the list of prisoners here. There's no one named Saul on it." "I'm glad," Nancy said, "that he's not with Gimler and Sacco. We've talked to him. He's very nice. Probably he didn't come back to the island after being in Key Biscayne." Nancy and Ned returned to their friends. She suggested that they separate into couples and make their search on the island some distance from one another. "We'll be couple 1, George and Bert 2, and Bess and Dave 3. In case of trouble, call out your numbers instead of your names. And Danny, how about your going around the island in the skiff? If you see anyone or anything suspicious, sound your horn." "Okay," he agreed. The 3 couples started off on their search. Bess and Dave stopped for a few minutes to look at the crocodiles, and Bess remarked, "If all the workers are gone, who's going to take care of these reptiles?" Dave grinned. "How would you like the job?" Instead of answering, Bess made a face at him. Just then, one of the old male crocodiles grunted, then hissed, and opened its jaws wide. Within seconds, he closed them with such a resounding snap that the couple jumped. Bess and Dave waited no longer. They took off for a copse of mangroves to start their hunt for the missing suspects. Meanwhile, Bert and George tramped through a jungle area, looking up into trees, behind bushes and on the ground. They stopped every few minutes to listen, but everything was quiet, and there was no sign anywhere of the wanted men. They came to a low coral cave and stopped. "Isn't that attractive?" George whispered. "I wonder if those men are hiding inside." "I'll look," Bert said. "No, they might trap you and attack." "I'll be careful. Just follow me, but wait when I get to the entrance." The 2 advanced without making a sound. Slowly they neared the entrance. Then Bert picked up a stone and threw it inside. There was no reaction from within. He cautiously peered around the rocky opening and saw the small interior. The walls were jagged and arranged in a moon-shaped pattern, but there was no cement or any other indication that the cave was man-made. "It's empty," Bert reported. "Anyway, it's not much of a hiding place." George looked inside. "Isn't that coral fascinating?" she said. "Think of the millions of tiny polyps climbing up and dying to form layer after layer of coral." "Yes," Bert said, "but don't get sidetracked. Never mind the coral now. Let's look for those missing men." The couple went deeper into the jungle. Rabbits and raccoons scurried away from them. Suddenly the stillness was broken by a loud noise. Something was crashing through the underbrush ahead of them. George wondered if it was an animal. Then they heard human voices. "They may be the suspects," Bert whispered. "Come on." All this time, Nancy and Ned were searching along the waterfront, thinking the men might have hidden a second boat among the mangroves and would try to reach it. Suddenly, Nancy stopped short. "Look," she said, pointing to a periscope out in the green waterway. "It's moving in the direction of the island," Ned said, excited. "Maybe it'll dock here." "Let's return to the pier," Nancy suggested. She and Ned quickly made their way back, careful to remain shielded by trees at all times. Just before they reached the open areas, the submarine surfaced. It slid in noiselessly. The hatch opened and 2 men appeared. They jumped to the dock and disappeared in the direction of the main building. Nancy and Ned wondered if the men were aware of the recent events on the island. Obviously, they were not worried about being seen. Or were they just desperate? Nancy decided on a bold move. "Ned, are you game to go aboard and hide?" "Sure thing." "Wait just a second," Nancy said. She plucked a leaf from a trailing sea grape bush. Next, she picked up a small, sturdy stick and scratched out the words, "Going aboard. Couple 1." She jabbed the leaf onto a tree twig and beckoned Ned to follow her. Quickly, the two went to the open hatch and climbed down the iron ladder. "Where can we hide?" Ned asked, looking around. Nancy pointed to the upright lockers and opened one. It contained a coiled rope similar to the one she had seen on the sub in Key West. Ned checked the adjoining locker. Behind some clothes, many boxes were stacked neatly from the floor to the ceiling. Each one was stamped, "High-speed cameras, Bridgeport, Connecticut." "That's a lot of cameras for a few guys," Ned remarked. "Right," Nancy said. "Now suspicious. Open the next locker." Ned did, and found similar boxes concealed behind rain gear. Further search revealed guns, grenades, and explosives in each locker. Ned shook his head in disbelief, and Nancy's eyes were wide with amazement. "Ned!" she exclaimed. "Now I know what the secret of Crocodile Island is. Gimler and Sacco are taking expensive high-speed cameras out of the U.S. They're smuggling them to someplace, maybe Mexico." As the two hurried back to the ladder, Ned put a hand on Nancy's shoulder. "You're right, and this means we're in great danger. We'd better get out of here before—" Just then they heard voices. Two men were conversing rapidly and walking toward Nancy and Ned. The couple, who did not want to be seen, scooted into the first two lockers. She hid behind coiled ropes. Ned managed to squeeze in back of the rain gear and stood next to the boxes of cameras. They left the doors slightly ajar so they could see who was coming. The two men they had seen leave the sub re-entered it. Quickly, one of them turned a handle, which slowly closed the hatch. The other man rotated a wheel that retracted the periscope. Then he started the engine, and the sub moved away. Nancy and Ned held their breath, wondering what would happen next. The man at the wheel suddenly laughed. He said confidently, "We pulled that one off all right. No more bothering with Gimler and Sacco. Next stop, Mexico." End of chapter 19.